Well, it's time for the patrons only video for the week, if anybody's watching. So a little bit about hermeneutics again. I want to express that meaning is now. Let's say that I were to write the most brilliant essay that's ever been known to humanity, but only I could understand it. What point would there be in that? That there is a strangely, it's bizarre to me when you reflect upon it. The paradigm, the mindset of people that says the inspiration is then, which I agree with, but if there's not an inspiration now, it's pointless. I mean, it really is. I mean, this could be the most brilliant thoughts and ideas, but if I don't have access to it, it's completely pointless to me. You see what I'm saying? There's this strange, we got to get back to what it meant. And of course, I built my life on getting back. So I value that. I hope you're not misunderstanding me. I'm just saying that if there isn't an inspiration of the Holy Spirit now, if it doesn't make it to my life now, it's irrelevant. It might as well be a poem written by my dog. I mean, you know what I'm saying? There has to be the now. If it doesn't come to me now, it doesn't matter. So the way I see inspiration is that for Luke and for Luke's audience, there was a moment of inspiration. For David or for whoever wrote Psalm 16 or Psalm 110, there was a moment of inspiration for them and for Israel. And there can be also moments of inspiration for us now, though that's more dangerous, because I know by faith that David and Luke were inspired. I don't know for sure that I'm inspired. So it gets real complicated. It's simple. Again, it's simple as beans and rice if you're just in the spirit and reading. But in terms of the history of it, it gets complex because God is running a complex universe here. And it's beautiful the way he does it. But one of the ways he does it, I'm convinced, is that he meets people where they're at. All of that is to say is, I've come not to view these things as problems or as issues. I think I can just let the text say what the text says. I can let the evidence, the chips of the evidence fall where they lie. And I'm not worried about these things. So for example, did Luke write Acts? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it doesn't really bother me one way or another. It's a tradition, right? Acts doesn't say who its author was. And we'll get the wee passages of Acts. We'll get to those, maybe a year from now if I keep doing this. But for now, we'll call the author of Acts Luke, although there is nothing in terms of inerrancy or infallibility or anything that would require us to require Luke Acts. We confuse tradition with things that are actually in the text. Now, Peter is speaking in Acts 2. Could Peter have given this speech on the day of Pentecost in the year 30? He could have. Peter probably spoke some Greek. Now, my hunch is, again, to me, I've gotten to the point to where all things being equal, let's go with the most probable thing, at least in terms of my own private thinking. All things being equal, let's just go with the most probable thing. It doesn't seem to me most probable, and then I realize there's some intuition here, but it doesn't seem to me most probable that Peter would have felt most at ease in Greek. Now, I know I have a colleague here who probably slapped me because for him, look at 1st and 2nd Peter, and 1st and 2nd Peter is good Greek. And any suggestion that written with the help of Silas, in 1 Peter 5, has anything to do with the Greek of 1 Peter, he gets really ticked at that sort of thing. But it seems to me that Peter's love language, his heart language, probably was Aramaic. He probably knew some Greek, and yes, it would have been logical to preach in Greek if you have a multi-ethnic or regional, multi-language audience. Greek would have been the lingua franca, and so it would have made sense for him to teach in Greek on the day of Pentecost. My sense is, though, that probably Peter did not feel that comfortable in Greek. In fact, a little bit in chapter 4, which we may get to in a month or two, they call them unlettered men, illiterate men. Now, that doesn't mean that Peter couldn't read. It may mean that he didn't read Greek. Again, I think my colleague would be very annoyed. But I just have to wonder if my colleague is cooking the books because in order to make things feel better, or first tradition. Well, I'm not throwing out the possibility that Peter might have preached in Greek. I will say that but again, we had the video several weeks ago about how Thucydides composed speeches in his history, and so it would not have been lying. It would not have been. How dare you, as a historian, compose speeches? Well, how dare you assume that modern standards of history writing have to apply to the ancient world? I mean, it's a blind spot. It's very annoying to me. Although you're whoever's listening to this, you're some of the few who actually know how I think as a scholar about these sorts of things. And so it would not have been bad practice. It would not have been bad form in any way. It would not have been considered a negative for Luke to compose this speech in accordance with what he thinks Peter might have said on the day of Pentecost. That was perfectly legitimate, according to Thucydides. And Thucydides is one of the more scrupulous historians of the ancient world. So again, we have assumptions and traditions, and we get very upset. I think we should just relax and hear what God wants to say to us through these texts. So this quotation of Psalm 16 does seem to follow the Greek version rather than the Hebrew version of Psalm 16. Here is, I think, the most obvious place. I think there may be more to it, but here, doing a quick look, here is the place where I think it's most obvious. So here is the Hebrew of Psalm 16:9. Therefore my heart is glad, my soul rejoices, my body also dwells secure. So we look down at the Greek. On account of this, my heart rejoiced, okay, and my tongue rejoiced. Okay, tongue. There's no tongue up here. It's soul. And then, of course, still, and my flesh will dwell in hope. Well, this doesn't say in hope. It says my body, instead of flesh, that's okay, dwells secure. So you can see that there's a little hint that either one, Peter preached the sermon in Greek. Two, Luke has paraphrased the sermon for his audience by using the Greek. Or three, that Luke is somewhat composing this speech, and since Luke knows the Greek, he's using the Greek. Three possibilities. I don't personally think that any of those possibilities contradict inerrancy or inspiration, or that any of those possibilities are problematic. We get all bent out of shape, but the fact of the matter is we get bent out of shape because we haven't gone through the fires of this level of detail of analysis of the text. I think at some point, you come to a comfort with the text and say, what was God saying? What is God saying? And let these kinds of details fall away as not really being important to the discussion. They're like the envelope in which the message comes. You don't have to agree with me, obviously. Well, okay. So now let's go back to the psalm itself in Psalm 16. So I was reading a little bit in ye old Craig Keener. He suggests, and again, I don't necessarily have a bias, or maybe I do, I don't know. I'm okay with David being the author of this psalm. I'm also okay with David not being the author of this psalm. Keener suggests this sounds like Levitical, like this would be a Levitical person, drink offerings and things like that. But I mean, why wouldn't David have offered a drink offering? So I wouldn't want to say, Ken, True, false. David wrote Psalm 16. I mean, I don't know. He might have. These titles, of course, were added later, as we've seen with some other psalms here. So, is it a psalmist? Is it David? I don't know. Not. Of course, again, Acts 2 does, with the framework of Acts 2, assumes that it's David. But that to me is perfectly expected, because everybody thought David wrote these psalms in the first century, and so God met them where they were at within their assumptions. You don't have to agree with this, but again, I think after you've been hammered about by the evidence, you begin to get comfortable with these sorts of things. Now, not everybody does. My colleague, I don't think he ever got comfortable with those sorts of things. He's very smart. Okay, so protect me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you're my God. I have no good apart from you. As for the holy ones in the land, they are noble, in whom is all my delight. Who are the holy ones? I assume the holy ones are those in the land who are following the law, and perhaps especially the Levitical law, if Keener's right here. Those who choose another god multiply their sorrow. So certainly there were people who were serving other gods in the time of David. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out. I will not take their names upon my lips. So very good. Psalmist is not going to worship you will have no other gods before me. Psalmist is not going to worship other gods, not going to mention them over drink offerings. The Lord, Yahweh, is my chosen portion. You hold my lot. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. David could have said this. A Levite could have said this. Of course, a great verse, isn't it? True for many of us. There are many who don't. There are many who don't have a goodly heritage. I'm very grateful to the Lord that I have a goodly heritage. The boundary lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I keep the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore, my heart is glad. We're into the part that Acts quotes now. Therefore, my heart is glad. My soul rejoices. My body rests secure. For you don't give me up to Sheol, or let your faithful one see the pit. You show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forever. Again, I think in context, again, I could be wrong, but in context, I think the most likely reading of this verse is that it is talking about that God's going to save him. That God's not going to let him die. Now, of course, that's not the way. That that Luke takes it. Luke takes this to be about Jesus not leaving Jesus in the grave, whereas I think in context, if we ask, how could a psalmist, how could David have said these words about himself? You're not going to let me die, I think is a very easy reading of this psalm inductively. Now, I might say there is a verse here. Sorry, I took it down. The word I saw here, pro-oromain. Let me look that up in Psalm 16 here. That is also a word that is only found in the Greek. Next verse. So you can see that the Hebrew is more like, I keep the Lord always before me, or I have set the Lord continuing before me. And it's the Greek here that has pro-oromain, I have foreseen. And so the Greek is set up a little bit, I think, to give the impression of a prophecy. I have foreseen the Lord before me. And so you could understand how the Holy Spirit could inspire either Peter or Luke to see this as a prophecy. And I don't have a problem with reading this as a prophecy, because I believe the Spirit inspires us where we're at. He doesn't inspire us where somebody else is at. He inspires us where we're at. And this was a powerful interpretation of Psalm 16 to Luke. Okay, well, you don't have to agree with that, and maybe the Lord will sit me in the corner in a dunce cap for reading it that way. Well, one more verse. Of course, Luke makes his point that David wasn't abandoned David was abandoned in Hades. He's still buried. Okay, so next one is this Psalm 110. This one's a little bit more awkward because in the Gospels, Jesus quotes it. Although Jesus is being a little bit clever in it in Mark 12. There's a wink, I think, maybe involved with Jesus' quote of this. But anyway, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. So as I said in my Greek video, the way that the early Christians took this, including the way that Jesus presents it to his opponents, the Lord is Yahweh, said to my Lord the Messiah. So this is David speaking. Yahweh said to my Lord the Messiah, sit at my right hand. So David, again, is understood to be predicting something in relation to the Messiah. Now, when we go back to Psalm 110, again, it's the heading, a Psalm of David, that is leading to this interpretation. But if this is a psalm by a psalmist, then rather than by David, then this makes sense inductively as well. Yahweh said to my Lord the King, sit at my right hand. It's kind of an enthronement psalm. The Lord sends out from Zion your mighty scepter, O King. Rule in the midst of your foes, O King. The people will offer their sums willingly on the day you lead your forces on the holy mountains. From the womb of the morning, like dew, your youth will come to you. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. In other words, not a Levitical priest, but a king priest. And of course, Hebrews will use that verse quite a bit. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. He will execute judgment among the nations, filling them with corpses. He will shatter heads over the wide earth. He will drink from the stream by the path. Therefore, he will lift his head. Now, the New Testament relies on verse 1 a lot, and Hebrews relies on verse 4 a little. None of the rest of these verses are used in the New Testament, but you can see how they could have read it. They could have read them in terms of the day of judgment, the day of wrath, when Jesus returns. And I suspect that's probably how they read the rest of the psalm. But originally, probably this was a psalm in relation to some king, maybe an enthronement of the king, promising that the king will have victory in war and so forth. Now, you don't have to accept that, but those are the inductive thoughts that come into my mind when I read this psalm, having taken off the heading and said, how might this have been understood? Now, of course, there are some who say this is a very late psalm. I think they have to be wrong. I think this has to be wrong. But there's some who suggest that this might be true of the Maccabees, since they were king priests. But I think that's way too late for this psalm. Well, this has been a few thoughts. I don't know how great of thoughts they've been to you, but at least helps you to see some of the hermeneutical issues that are involved when you begin to delve into inductive readings of these texts. Have a great week.